Hello, I'm Gigi Kopelak. Welcome to the program. One of the reasons that I really love doing this show is that I get to listen to people's stories, and I get to find out the connections between their life and their art. My multi-talented guest today, Sally Aldrich, was a teacher in the Pleasantville schools for over 20 years. How did that experience connect to her art? We'll find out today. So Sally, welcome.
Well, thanks. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, I called you multi-talented because you work in two different mediums. You work with clay and you work with painting.
Right.
You do some watercoloring.
Right.
So tell me, which was the first one when you started?
Well, my mother and my grandmother were both painters, so I quite naturally grew up in a household of people who were always doing art.
Mm-hmm.
And music was the other love, but my mother didn't push music. She pushed music so much on me that I think I went the art direction.
Oh. Something to reject. That's always good.
Perhaps.
Yeah. But what, you were a watercolorist initially? Was that
No, I actually started with oils and acrylic, and I went to Connecticut College
mm-hmm.
in New London, majored in painting and art history, and I was really working. In those days, that was in the 60s, you had to, to stay in that art department, you had to try to be an abstract painter.
Yeah.
So that's how I really started. It wasn't until I was teaching in Pleasantville that I really kind of began to expand. I think it was 1978, they said, oh, you're going to teach high school ceramics next year. And I was teaching junior high at the time.
Okay.
So I had been hired
during a bomb scare.
During a bomb scare, and I was getting a divorce, and I knew that I had to get this job.
Right.
And because I had 2 children and a house to support. And I really loved the idea that I'd had some background in publishing, but that I could really use my education and to make really a career for myself.
Right.
And
so you didn't have that teaching background.
So I didn't have any kind of a teaching background.
You had a background. You were working in publishing.
Right.
Yeah.
And I had done some substitute teaching at BOCES.
Mm-hmm.
So I was used to working with teenage schizophrenics, trainable educables. And in Pleasantville, when I'm getting interviewed by 3 different principals, and I'm not even certified, they say, well, you've never taught normal children before. And I'm thinking, with my hands tied behind my back, but it's true, there was a bomb scare. It was the 70s. I was calling myself Ms. Aldrich,
yeah.
and having to explain that that was not such a radical thing to do. That
to be called Ms.
Right,
in those days.
Right, yeah. It was like Mr. and
yeah. How times have changed.
Right, I know it.
Yeah.
So I'm in the superintendent's office, and the principal is holding the bomb from the bomb scare.
Oh no, they actually had the bomb.
Well, it was like a, something that the kids manufactured and put in the bathroom, and it made smoke. It wasn't anything huge. But it really caused the school to stop for a day.
Everybody evacuated.
Everybody evacuated, right.
Yeah.
So he said, you must really want this job. And I said, I need this job. Mm. And
so they hired you, and you went for your certification.
Right.
Yeah, afterwards. Right. Yeah, and you were teaching mostly painting then, I guess, or?
Oh, I was teaching actually I was working with Walter Hahn. I was getting this he was the middle school teacher, and he really wanted me to take over the 6th grades. But they had a fabulous program where if they were studying, for instance, the Renaissance in the history, social studies classes, we would be teaching perspective in the art classes. So we really had a very united curriculum, really long before that really became kind of more de rigueur. Yeah. And so I learned Walter Hahn's specialty was Asian art, and I learned a lot about sumi brush painting and wood carving, and I had a whole kind of education really with Chinese and Japanese art that I'd never had before.
And you can see that influence now in your work, which we were going to see.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So when they tell me to teach ceramics, I'm like literally 1 semester ahead of the kids. And I said, I know I'm getting certification, but I need to really study with the finest potter I knew. So I started studying with Jay Lindsay, and I just got hooked on clay.
Yep.
So for years, I really threw on the wheel. I did a lot of sumi brush paintings on clay, really.
Painting on clay, like dishes.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like, I have one that has these kind of Vietnamese bugs running around it, or I did dragons, or just kind of painting. I learned to throw plate forms and bowls that I could decorate, because I'm still thinking in terms of being a painter.
All right, let me just stop you for a minute so
Yeah.
that we get this terminology correct. You throwing.
Oh, throwing on the wheel.
Okay.
That's actually how you make pottery forms when you're working on the wheel. It's called throwing.
Okay.
You don't throw, but you do.
They just call it throwing.
They call it
They want
that,
it to
right.
sound like you're doing something. But
Right.
you're actually just putting it on the wheel.
And then you're spinning it.
And then you're spinning it, but
and
they
you
call it
and
throwing.
you form the shapes,
Okay,
right?
right. And
Right.
as adverse to making it yourself, like a coil method?
Right.
Or?
Well, then that's all called hand building.
Okay.
And actually, what has happened with my clay since I left Pleasantville, I took an early retirement at 55 because I knew that I really wanted to pursue my own art.
Mm-hmm.
While I was there, however, I started painting again because I got moved to the high school.
Let's not go too fast, though,
Sure.
because we want to look at some of your work here.
Okay.
And so we want to see, so we saw this, I'm sure that we've seen the two painting on clay
Right.
bowls, but then you have a teapot
Right.
that I want to show,
Right.
and with little
Figures.
Little figures on it. Now
Right.
that's still happening while you're learning the clay, or is this
No,
after you've left?
Now it's a little bit later.
It's a little bit later.
Right.
Yeah. And so you've gone from this drawing, this Asian influence.
That's still very. I don't think that's ever really left me.
No, I don't think so either.
Right.
That Asian influence
But
is there.
I started. I mean, and that's I think why I started doing teapots.
Okay.
And then I began sculpting little figures like a frog
Okay.
on the top of the teapot on the lily pad.
Okay.
And that happened because I was working with a woman named Harriet Ross. I had joined Clay Art Center. I was working with her and this wonderful Japanese potter, Yuji Yashui. And their influences were kind of strong to get me sculpting.
Okay.
So I did these teapots.
And then you moved from the teapots and you actually started doing the figures.
Well, before I was doing figures, I was even doing things like I have this large Sung Dynasty cat
Okay.
that my husband had gotten me, my new husband.
Is that the early sculpting?
Yeah, and so
that
I was
early.
the sculpting was getting larger and larger.
Okay, so how big is that cat? It looks like he's laying on a bed or something?
No, it's a box, about so big.
Okay.
So it was a large
So he's
figure.
like about 12 inches or
Right,
something
right,
like that. Yeah.
right,
Okay.
Right.
And then from that, this is my favorite, although I love all of your work, but you went into this women's series.
Right. Well, now I'm starting to have shows. I had two shows actually at Clay Art Center, one in '95, another one in '98. And I think the cat sculpture was actually on my postcard invitation. But when I worked with Yuji, I started doing large pots like this. And I'm also painting at the same time because when I started teaching advanced placement art, I started wanting to paint again. And it's kind of like always dividing my time between these things.
Wearing two hats, putting
Right.
them in the painting. But is there a big difference in your thought process in doing, or is it similar?
I think it's similar.
It is similar. You
But
get an idea and you sculpt
And then-
it, or
and
you
then
get an idea and
exactly.
you paint
Right,
it. Yeah.
right. So I started using watercolor. I think watercolor, to answer your question thoroughly, when I did this show at the Flatiron Gallery where I have this woman goddess figure and I have the vessel figure. And I saw that women could be like a vessel, contained, subordinate, or like a goddess who may not be a slim, TV version of a goddess, but a
Right.
woman who's really sure of herself.
Right.
And I found that clay is a wet, sloppy medium, and so is watercolor. And
I thought you were going to say, so is woman. But okay.
Well, that too.
That too.
But I think that's what they have in common. Like watercolor.
But I think woman. You think of form when you
Right.
think of woman, and
Right.
so you think that vessel that you have with the handle on
right.
it. You call that a woman vessel.
Right.
But it doesn't have an image of a woman on it.
No, but see, I see that abstractly as a vessel.
Okay,
That
so
is woman who has a handle, who must be carried, who is dependent, versus how I saw the woman goddess figure.
I got it now.
Who is not your TV image of a goddess,
I see.
but a woman kind of in command of herself, sure of herself.
Okay.
And I was working, as I say, this was a watercolor, where you get the paper, you soak it. See, in clay it's wet, and it's free, and it has to be fast. And that also relates to Asian art, too, where you put the brush stroke down and you leave it and let it tell itself.
Okay, so we do have that watercolor here,
Right,
that of
right.
woman and vessel. So those are the two things that were happening at the same time.
Right.
And then but you were also doing the sculpture of women, which is emerging
Right,
woman. You have that
right.
sculpture of the emerging, which is
Right.
not too big, right?
No,
it's small.
that's a small sculpture.
Yeah.
Right.
And the ones I love are the corsets.
Oh, okay.
How did you get into that? That's so great.
Gosh, I don't know. It's just kind of like an idea
Yeah.
occurred to me, and I thought, oh, this could really be fun and outrageous to have women underwear, but you know,
Yeah.
very sexy corsets. And I was also using raku firing at the time.
Okay.
The images you've seen so far were done with a gas reduction kiln, which is a great way to fire, high-fired, very permanent sculpture clay.
Okay, when they say gas reduction, does that mean that the gas keeps reducing in temperature as you're going along?
No, no, it's opposite. You're getting faster and faster, but there's a process where it's called you're going into reduction. What you're doing is you're reducing the oxygen in the air. You're closing down the damper, and you create a whole lot of carbon in the kiln itself. And that is what changes a copper going from a green to a red. And you get certain effects with the reduction.
Yeah, when you say copper, you're talking about the patina, the glaze, the glaze that's on.
Right.
So, and it's also hardening the clay.
No, the clay is already very hardened.
Oh.
You
Okay.
You create something, you dry it for a week or so, you bisque fire it. When you go to the second fire, you've gotten all the water out of the clay. At that point, if anything is wet, it will explode in the kiln. So you have to be very, very careful with it.
So there's two firing processes then. The
Yeah.
first one is just the clay coming out without any glaze on it at all.
It's called bisque fire.
Bisque fire.
Or the English call it biscuit.
Biscuit.
But
And then the second firing is when you put the glazes on it, and then you have to have that experience of what happens,
Exactly.
what color turns to what. You put it on as green, you said, and it becomes red, or vice
If you're
versa.
lucky.
If you're lucky.
You know, you can't really predict these things.
Oh, you can't. So a lot of it is accident then.
Hopefully happy accidents.
Hopefully.
Yeah, a lot of others. But see, those corsets, I wanted to get that black look with them and the metallic glazes, and that's called raku firing, and that's a different process. That's you've bisqued your work. Now you're firing outdoors, and you're dressed like you're fighting anthrax. You're covered here, and you're here, and you have these tongs, and you actually take your things out of. You heat them to about 1850 in an outdoor kiln. You take them out with tongs and submerge them into wood ash or sawdust, and then you close it up, and that is another reduction thing. You've closed off the oxygen.
Okay.
So the clay body turns black itself, and then the metallic glazes come. But that's actually kind of low firing.
That sounds really tough. So 1,850 degrees, is that right?
1850, but when I'm in the gas kiln doing the other things, I'm up to 2350.
Oh my goodness.
So it's a
Yeah.
you have to have a lot of respect for the process.
You do.
You do.
You really
Right.
do.
Right.
Which, there's an oil painter, this is one of the things that I cannot do. I'm too impatient. I want to see it. And, and that's why I can't be a printer. I can't be.
Okay.
No,
Raku is for impatient people because you get to take it home that day.
Oh, I see.
See, I mean, if I'm doing...
But it's different from when you started it and then when you see the finished result.
right.
Sometimes are you surprised? You say...
Oh, definitely.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And not always happily surprised.
No,
you try to be, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So let's talk about what happens next. You have a series of birds that you...
Oh, I love this kind of outdoor sculpture clay. So I do a lot of birds. And
What do you mean outdoor sculpture clay now? This is in...
well, if you look at the birds,
okay.
that's kind of a harder clay. That's a clay with a lot of grog in it. And
Grog?
Grog is a
Beer?
kind of little ground up particles of a bisque fire that goes actually into the clay body, and it gives it a kind of sturdiness.
Okay.
So this is called a T1 clay, this particular one I use. And when I put it in the gas kiln, it gets toast in certain areas where it reduces.
Gets toast colored, you mean?
Toast colored.
Okay.
I put it in with no glaze. That's what I do on these birds a lot.
All right.
And then they're strong enough that they can handle being out of doors.
And then you don't put the second firing? There's no glaze on?
They do the second
Oh,
firing.
they do.
I always do the second firing, but without glaze.
Without glaze?
Right. Because you want to get that high fired. If it's something fired to 2350, it's pretty strong.
Yeah.
And you want to keep it up at that.
Right. right. So the birds and then this little leopard.
Oh, now actually, reminds me in a way back to Harriet, because I always went through museums primarily looking at paintings.
Mm-hmm.
I started going to things like the African wing with Harriet when she'd take a group. And I'd start to look at things in different ways. And I find that what I get inspired by is seeing something and it just hits you and you just feel you want to do it. And they had these wonderful bronze leopards from Niger, and they're quite old, they're African. And I just knew I had to start doing these. And this little figure is actually, he's quite big. I've sold a few of them, and one actually got a prize in the Katona Museum show. I'm sorry, it wasn't a Katona Museum, it was the Bedford Art Show, but the director, Neil Watson, was jurying, so I got an honorable mention, and that felt nice. But this is actually wood-fired, and that's another entirely different way of firing.
And do you know before you're starting the sculpture which way you're going to fire it, or do you look at the sculpture and say, okay, this one's raku, this one's, or do you make that?
Pretty much I make that decision when I do it.
Beforehand?
Right.
So you say, I'm going to make a raku today, okay.
Well,
Is this
my friend Allison Palmer had built this wonderful wood-fired kiln up in Kent, and I hadn't seen her in a long time.
Okay.
And I wanted to try it with her.
Okay.
And started doing a lot of firing.
And wood firing means instead of the gas, they actually take wood and they burn it.
And that really is a long process.
Well, because you have to be there putting more wood on it, I assume.
Yeah, everybody has shifts.
Yeah.
And I've often taken the 6 o'clock to midnight shift.
Oh, stop.
And it's wonderful.
You stay awake that whole time?
Oh, you have to. But she'll have music on outside, but you're just kind of out there with nature. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And you're just stoking gently.
Yeah.
And then once you're at the end of the shift, you know, they're calling stokes, and stokes means you take the peep out and you're shoving in wood. Sometimes at the very end it's like once every few minutes.
Okay.
And I just recently finished a wood fire up in Peters Valley, New Jersey. It's a great big craft center, and we fired from a Friday night to a Saturday night, 24 hours, and then left the work for a week, and we just picked it up last week.
Okay.
And there were some wonderful surprises and not such wonderful surprises.
Yeah, you're going to have a show there, aren't you?
No.
Okay. I'm mixing up all the shows that you're in. I know that you show your work at the Neuberger.
Oh, I have some
stuff at the Neuberger Museum.
In the gift shop.
At the Neuberger Museum. I will show that at the end. I'm skipping ahead now. So, okay. But now let's talk about some of your watercolors, which are beautiful. We'll go first to this whole fish series. I know you travel a lot. Is that what this is?
Right.
Yeah.
I think that kind of brings it on. Well, when I travel, I always bring my watercolors with me. There's always that point, and like we've rented houses in France, and I've just sat at the end of the day. Everybody's having their drinks, and I'll just sit outside and paint. But again, it was Wendy Garber at the Flatiron Gallery who gave me a show, and I decided to think about underwater vessels. That was what the clay things. Watercolors and underwater vessels. I think I called that show.
So now vessels again, is that swimming?
No. Then I was thinking of underwater. No, thinking of vessels. And in that case, I made these figures that sort of looked like anemones.
Oh, okay. So now the vessels are now creatures of the sea.
Right.
Right. Okay. So
because I just sort of thought of the pun of sea vessels and vessels. I like to think of puns.
Oh, you mean like a ship vessel. I got it. Let me just say that the Flatiron Gallery is in Peekskill.
Right.
Okay, so people know when
in that wonderful art district.
Yeah.
And that's a great place.
Yeah.
So I did the flamefish. I saw that in photographs, and its body kind of slithers along the coral, and it looks like a dragon's robe to me.
Yeah, because that painting is very abstract. If you don't even know the title, it's beautiful. It could be. It could be anything. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but then the anemone also that has more reality to it. To me, it looks more like. Yeah.
Now I think of that as being abstract.
So that makes the world go round, right?
I know.
But how important is the viewer to the art? You know, I think that's an interesting thing. You got to take off that hat,
right,
and then just let it happen. And if somebody sees something different, I like that when someone sees something different.
I do too.
Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah.
And then the dancing kelp came out of that period too.
Yeah, and that's a different. You've actually made 4 or 5 different,
Right.
this is a theme in your work also, piecing it, isn't it? I mean,
Oh, I love doing that.
Yeah. So is it one whole and then you cut it, or
No,
you
there are several different paintings that you start one and you realize, gee, that really leads to that with that negative space, and then then it kind of grows by topsy.
Okay.
So they kind of become little diptychs and triptychs and quadriptychs, I guess. Right.
But they're all framed under one,
right,
in one frame, just so they look like, And so the next one, okay, now those are watercolor we've just seen.
Right.
But you also, when did you start working with acrylics?
About 2 years ago.
Oh, new.
2 or 3, I think it was kind of like the end of 2007. Gail Lee, who's a great friend, said, oh, come paint on Mondays with Bernice Horowitz. I had been to a show that she had that Gail was in. And Bernice is just a wonderful woman. She's South African, and she's had a wonderful big studio in her whole basement. And so I joined a class. It's on Mondays. And she got me painting in acrylics again, and more abstractly again, kind of going back to what I was doing. Except I prefer painting on the Arches paper, I think, to
which is a watercolor paper.
Right.
Yeah.
The 300-pound weight heavy paper.
Right. Is that the heaviest? The 300 pounds?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you wet it first, or you work dry?
I work dry.
You do?
You know.
Okay.
No, and with different gel mediums.
Okay.
In fact, I'm kind of doing some experimentations with them right now.
Okay.
And then sometimes, like the one of the landscape that I did with her, the yellow and green landscape. It's got the
called
trees
stone fences?
with the stone fences in it. I've also kind of torn pieces of the Arches paper and put them in as collage within themselves.
So you've painted them, torn them, and then put them in on top. So
and then sometimes just left them in and just kind of played with them.
Yeah. So it's become a collage then.
So it becomes a collage.
Yeah, but of your own work.
Of a collage of your own work, exactly. Right.
That's
right.
Yeah, so.
Right.
But we haven't left the sculptures. You're still working on these and this whole series of. Is this a series, the Owl Angels?
Not really. Well, I've done a number of them, and have sold a couple. But I just love birds, so birds come out. And the Owl Angel is really a woman at the same time.
Oh, we're back to the woman
thing. She has
thing.
that.
Yeah.
That's funny. You know, I had a friend over for dinner the other night. He said owls are always men, and I said, no. I said, well, how do they procreate? So he was pulling my leg.
Oh, he was pulling your leg.
But I like to work with Susan Halls at Clay Art Center, who's a sculptor.
Okay, Clay Art Center is in Port Chester. Am I got that right? So people we know what
I'm
we're
an
talking about.
associate member. I have a studio at home, but I can go there to fire. I do all my firings there.
Okay.
Except the wood firing. I do often.
And they also have shows there. They have a Christmas show, and they have shows regularly. So can they buy? So can people go there and see your work? Would they be there on display?
No, only they have a permanent floating gallery that's always has somebody different every month.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
Right.
But if I haven't had a show there since '98.
Okay.
So.
But can they visit your studio? They could visit.
My studio's at home.
Okay. Right.
So, but like they have a show coming up right now called Hot Pots that I will be in.
Okay.
So there are occasions. They have an upstairs gallery too, where a lot of us have work. I'll have some work there in November. Okay. So yes, they do from time to time. You know, give you. It's a wonderful thing about them. They give you that opportunity.
Let's just say right here, because I don't want to leave it out, that you also teach.
Right.
You have several classes. So you, even though you've retired from Pleasantville, you still have this desire to teach. And And so you teach all ages, or is it adults primarily?
Well, I have an adult watercolor class, and they're just the greatest people. They keep coming back. And they're getting very professional. They do a lot of exhibiting themselves, and we're going to have our 3rd exhibition of their work. We do one I've been doing this 8 years, because we've been doing it every 3 years at the Ridgefield Library.
Okay.
And that's my Thursday group. And then on Mondays I have a children's clay class after school at Boys and Girls Club.
And that is where?
That's also in Ridgefield.
Okay.
And we have a couple of wheels, and we have our own kiln. I used to have to bring.
And what age are these kids? You're saying?
Oh, I think the youngest are like 2nd grade, and they go up to about 11, 12.
Wow.
But we have 2 potter's wheels. I have some kids who are very good at that.
Really? That's great.
And that's fun.
Yeah.
I like working with little young children too, and it's great.
Yeah. So it's the clay for the children and the watercolors for the adults. That's interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the next is black cat. Let's look at this.
That's another.
Raku.
No, actually, I think I did that originally in the gas reduction kiln with just a black iron oxide, and I couldn't stand the way it looked.
Okay.
And I go to I like to go to school myself. I go to a clay critique class on Mondays, and Ruth Barrelson, who leads it with Marilyn Ricada, and this is at Clay Art Center. It's one of their classes. When I said, "You mean I can actually paint on something even though I've fired it with clay?" She said, "Of course you can. You can make your own patinas." So this is really, I've made a patina with paint on that cat to get that effect.
Oh, I'm so confused.
But that was so refreshing.
Yeah, yeah. So what kind of paint would you use?
That's just acrylic.
So you can paint with acrylic over a patina that you've already put on of glaze.
Right.
Was it shiny glaze or it wasn't?
No, it was just an
It was,
oxide.
okay, it was an oxide.
But I often paint.
Do you?
Yeah.
On the clay?
Well, suppose you have a small little crack that you want to repair, and you can repair that, and then you masterfully try to match the color. I mean, you can only do that in certain places. You would not do that in pottery, but on sculpture you can do that.
You would on a pottery because you use it for water or for eating or something like that. You wouldn't have that for a sculpture.
Right. So if it didn't work, it didn't work. But if, say, you spend a month on a large piece of sculpture, and the finish is just not what you want, Ruth kind of really gave me the freedom to work the finish. Even on that owl figure, that was done with wood fire, but I touched up that and worked on that.
All right. And then do you glaze over it with
No.
varnish or anything? It just you just the finish is the same.
Yeah.
Or do you have to paint the whole thing?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
you have to paint the whole.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
You know,
Very
you work
interesting.
on something till you really feel you've got it.
You know, I think that this is what it's all about: how to do a technique that maybe you know that the rest of us have no clue about, but it comes out fabulous, and so that's terrific.
So you have to keep working at it.
You have to keep all these little tricks. They're not tricks; they're just techniques.
Things take, like the nude clay wall piece. I started doing wall pieces last year.
The reclining nude.
I tried that with raku, and it just didn't work. I tried it another time with gas reduction, and something warped. And the original one I did back with Yuji in '96, which made me think, gee, I want to try that again, because I'd mounted it on wood, and
but the one that we're seeing now is not the original one. This is something recent.
This is like the 4th try.
Wow.
So that, you know, you just keep at it, and you learn. And I think, I mean, with art today, I think, you know, the rules have all been broken. We have installation art, we have this, we have that.
There are no rules. There absolutely are no rules. Yeah.
But you know, it really took somebody saying, yes, you can paint on your sculpture.
Right.
No, for
so,
me,
but the reclining nude, it's almost like tiles.
They are.
They are tiles, and you
I
make them in pieces, and then you have to make sure that when they're fired and they shrink, that they, oh my goodness, that's such hard work. Yeah.
And you have to fire them all at once in the same kiln, which is why it didn't work with raku.
Oh, okay.
Because raku, you just have a few pieces at a time.
Oh, and so you can't control that the way it shrinks.
Yeah.
And so then the one that hangs on the wall, this Coy's Joy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another wall.
That was in a show, All Fired Up, that was at Westchester Community College.
Right.
It was a month-wide, county-wide show.
Almost 2 months.
Almost 2 months.
To celebrate the 50th anniversary of Clay Art Center.
Okay.
And Rena Kashap, the director, you have to give her incredible credit that she wanted to just see clay all over Westchester. So Katona Museum had a show. Westchester Community College had a show, Westchester Arts Council.
The Blue Door,
the Blue Door, everywhere.
Everybody had it, yes. It was great.
So it was a great
Yours was one of the great shows, though. The one you were in at Westchester Community College.
I think Westchester Community College has some wonderful work.
Yeah,
really.
they did. It was a
I mean,
show.
I feel very humbled next to some of the people I see come out of clay art.
Right.
There's some wonderful.
But that was a great piece also. It was very different for you, I thought. It was something new.
Right.
You
see, I still have a fish in it, and he's got an Asian look about him.
He does. He's a koi.
Right.
And then this last one that we're going to show is the kind of thing that you would see if you went to the Newberger Museum, and you would see.
But it's in their gift shop. You have to be.
It's in their gift shop. But that's great because it's there all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think.
Well, I would love them to sell more.
Yeah.
So they weren't there all the time, but no, that's true.
Would you believe that the show has come to an end? I can't believe it. It's
wow.
such a pleasure to talk to you.
It was fun talking with you. I've loved it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. My pleasure.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Thank you for watching.